Good afternoon. I'm Dara Bunjon. I'm the food enthusiast here at J Moore Living. I'm a food writer, food stylist, PR maven, and a frustrated baker. Those of you joining us live, drop your questions in the comment section and I will check from time to time. You'll see me turn my head. Today's guest is Ali Bandier, a registered dietitian with a master's in nutrition, a mom, and the founder of Senta Health, who specializes in prenatal, postnatal, and pediatric nutrition. Using science backed recommendations, she helps families with their nutritional needs. Let's bring in Ali. Hi, Ali.
Hi,
Good
thanks so much for
afternoon.
having me. Good afternoon.
It's
I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm so thrilled that you could be here because these are things that we need to talk about. I mean, it's the holidays, but we really have to look at some of these subjects. And we're going to get to the holidays and nutrition in a bit. Ali, you have a master's in science. You are a registered dietitian and a certified dietitian nutritionist. What drew you to this field?
Yeah, I didn't always start out in this field. I was actually working in finance before I made the switch to nutrition. And I always had a personal interest in nutrition, but I never considered it as a career until a very specific turning point in my life. My dad was sick with colon cancer and he's okay now. But at the time, his doctors told me that his cancer was caused in large part by his diet and lifestyle. And this really shocked me. So I would go with him to all of his chemotherapy appointments. And when I was there, I talked to the doctors and the nurses and also the dietitians. And I guess I was young at the time and maybe a little naive, but I had no idea what a dietitian was. And I had no idea that it was a career I could have. So I was so impacted by the work that these dietitians were doing with my dad. And it really confirmed for me that I wanted to be able to have this incredible impact on people's lives and their health. So I completely changed careers. I went back to school. I had many, many years of training, biochem and organic chem, anatomy, chemistry, lots of science, because this was something that was so important to me. And then I finally was able to become a registered dietitian.
Well, with all your degrees, why did you choose to specialize in prenatal, postnatal, and pediatric nutrition?
When I went back to school at Columbia University, one of the first courses I took there was on human development. And it showed me that you could have such a significant impact via nutrition, both in utero and also in early childhood. So the reason I went back to nutrition was to be able to impact people's lives, but I realized I could have actually the biggest impact if I started at the very beginning because dietary habits patterns are formed actually very early. So I just loved it. So I decided to really specialize in that area.
So it was back in 2019, you started your company, Senta Health. What services does Senta offer, and why are they vital to the baby and the mother?
Yeah, so I think the biggest feeding and nutrition issues parents are facing now is just massive confusion in the market. There's an overwhelming amount of often conflicting information, and this has done really more to confuse us than it really has to help us. So at Senta Health, I really work to make sure information and strategies are simple, very straightforward for families. I offer them this freedom from confusion, and I make sure that all of the advice that I offer is grounded in science and reality. So it has to be applicable. My whole philosophy is to balance social and emotional wellness with physical well being because it's not just about the actual food you eat, but really how this fits into your life. So at Senta Health, I do this through individual and group counseling, as well as workshops and seminars and media like this.
Terrific. Before I forget, you were kind enough to come on and talk about what what we can do for the children and ourselves during the holidays. With the influx of sweets and overabundance of food, how does one navigate these temptations or not get out of control?
Yeah, so the holidays can be lovely, but they could also cause stress for families, especially with the change in schedules, kids out of school, and as you said, the overabundance of sweets. So I like to think about it in terms of a scarcity mentality for our kids and for us. The more we restrict, the more we want something. So, for example, if I said to you, you could never have chocolate ice cream again, never again, you'd probably think,
Right.
you're right, that's crazy. You'd probably think about it even more than you currently do. It would make it more special to you.
Mm,
And then let's
right.
say you finally got your hands on it, you'd probably eat so much of it, you'd binge on it. So when I think about children's nutrition, I apply this concept. So I don't restrict kids completely from eating sweets because the more you do that, the more they're going to want it. So, for example, let's talk about Hanukkah. For Hanukkah, we have potato latkes, for example. I would recommend offering these to your kids and not restricting them because once you restrict it, it puts this on a pedestal. So, yes, they already like it, but once it's on a pedestal and that you don't want them to have it, they want it even more and they eat more than their hunger can tolerate. So, one, don't restrict, but two, keep your normal structure in place. So, offer 3 meals, one or two snacks, and limit grazing throughout the day. So, your meals aren't being replaced with snacks. So, they're coming to whatever the indulgence is already satisfied with their nutrients.
Well, I think you might have just answered this. The parents set the tone for a child's eating habits. What are the
Mhm.
top three things should the parents strive for?
Yeah, so one, as I just mentioned, is structure. So I think having a good cadence in place on a daily basis really makes a difference. So having breakfast, lunch, dinner, scheduled snacks so that kids aren't just eating little bites of food throughout the day, and this would negatively impact how hungry they are when they come to a meal. But another very, very big part of my philosophy is no pressure. So the more we pressure our kids, the less they want to eat it. So if you're sitting there saying, just have one more bite, have a bite of broccoli, and then you could get up from the table, you need to eat that. They're going to resist you and they're going to not want to eat that even more. And pressure to eat is one of the biggest causes of picky eating. So kids, especially young kids, it's developmentally appropriate for them to want to be independent and to do the opposite of what we want them to do. So knowing that, if you take the pressure off, they'll actually be surprised that they're going to want to eat the foods that they wouldn't originally eat if you were telling them to do it. And the third thing is modeling. So we could have a huge positive influence on our kids just by letting them see us doing it. So if you really want your kid to eat carrots, for example, I would say let them see you eating carrots over and over again at a family meal, which is so influential without pressuring them to eat it. So those three things I think are the biggest things that parents can strive for.
Let me address that. Something comes to mind as to seeing your parents eat something and you want
Hmm.
to see what that's about. Who
Yeah.
in their right mind would eat a raw oyster? But my father ate them. And each time he goes, "You want to try one?" I go, "Yeah." Okay. And I go, like this. Now I love raw oysters, but it to follow what you just said, it's do as I do, it tempts them. There's something there. I was a very picky eater, very much so that if I said I like something, I got it for lunch
Hmm.
every day, the same thing for lunch in school.
Yeah.
And eventually I bring it home. My sister said, "Stupid, just throw it away." But I'd bring it home and she would have to find something else for me to eat. Breakfast was the same thing, chocolate milk and a soft boiled egg. I can't handle white milk, and the egg would nauseate me. I don't know when I went from picky to being a foodie that eats pretty much anything that's around. I don't know when we transition, but there are children who have a great palate who eat things that their parents are eating. One friend, this is sort of in the subject and sort of in my notes, her son, even into his teens, just ate cereal.
Hmm.
I didn't know if you had any thoughts about picky eaters.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Picky eating is a huge question, and I could talk for hours on picky eating. But I think the biggest misconception people have is either there's nothing you could do to help prevent picky eating, and then there's nothing you could do if picky eating is there to improve it. And the truth is, you could always make improvements to picky eating. I think the first thing to explain is this very well studied concept in feeding children called the division of responsibility. So, in this model, parents decide what to feed kids, when to feed them, and where to feed them. But the key is the kids decide how much of it to eat. And that's really hard for parents because kids oftentimes will come and sit down at a meal and not want to eat much of it. And I think the biggest caveat I have to that is you do want to take their preferences into account. So you're not going to put them down at a meal and give them things you absolutely know they hate. But with this structure, you can push them slowly to incorporate foods that they wouldn't normally eat. Meaning exposure and repetition to a wide variety of foods has been shown in the studies to really increase acceptance without forcing them to eat it. Because the truth is, you can't force your child to eat something. And even if you try, it'll never work in the short term. It'll never work in the long term. Maybe in the short term, they'll take that one bite, but in the long term, they really won't lead to an intrinsic love of food. So,
Well, I think I just lost a little bit of your sound. And if you can hear me, why don't you pop out for a second and come back in? And we'll go from there.
I think we just froze,
Okay.
but I'm back. Can you see me?
Yes, yes. And I can hear you. So we're all set.
Can you see me? I'm going to log out because you're frozen to me.
Okay. Here I am, and I'll be back in a moment. Let me take this time to wish everyone joyous holiday season. Um, don't overindulge, but enjoy the holidays. The Food Enthusiast will be returning January 5th when our guest will be Jeremy Diamond, author of the just released book, Tastemakers: The Legacy of Jewish Entrepreneurs in the Mid-Atlantic Grocery Industry. Hi, Ali. Welcome back.
Hi. I don't know what happened, but I'm back. I see you. You're not frozen. I'm not frozen. Um,
Okay. I missed you terribly.
thank you.
Uh,
Same.
um,
So,
sometimes I wonder, we're back on picky eaters,
mhm.
is it sometimes if a picky eater, if a child's not eating something, is it their body telling them something, telling you something?
So
It's
it's a
not
good
picky.
question. It's a good question. So people have preferences, right? So yes, you could really love one food and hate another food, and that is all very valid. But a child who's eating only will eat five foods if they don't have allergic reactions to the foods that they're not eating or some sort of inflammatory bowel issue, which would make them not want to eat this food or severe reflux. So, taking out all medical conditions that would influence this, it's not something your body is telling you if a child's only eating five foods. It really comes down to, in my opinion, a revamping of the environment, the family system, and also having patience for results. So you want to be able to implement all of these strategies, but then you have to wait for kids to get the exposure, get the repetition. And the hardest part of all is parents staying consistent in their approach. Because after a long day, after a stressful day, the last thing you
Right.
want to do is deal with a very stressful eating situation. But my whole goal with families that I work with is to make sure parents feel equipped and calm in handling any situation that they face at mealtimes.
And people can learn more about that if they go to sentahealth.com, and your Instagram is Senta Health. You can follow Ali there. Um, why is sugar bad?
Yeah, so sugar is something that has no nutritional value. It's not something that has anything beneficial for our bodies. It can contribute to weight gain, it can disrupt normal biological pathways that regulate your hunger hormones. It spikes your blood sugar, so excessive intake over time can increase your risk of developing insulin resistance. For kids, which is the population that I work very closely with, they don't like to brush their teeth. So excessive sugar can cause dental issues. I think the point with sugar is that there's no benefit to it, but I also think it is unavoidable to restrict sugar 100% for our kids. It's not realistic and it'll never happen, but I think it can be limited to a reasonable amount. For example, for kids 2 to 18 years old, the dietary guidelines recommend less than 10% of our calories per day from sugar, which I think is a reasonable goal.
So, I mean, there's a difference between refined sugar and the natural sugars that you get from
Of
fruits
course,
and vegetables, right?
yes.
What should a breastfeeding mom know about her nutrition? I know that's a very broad scope question,
Mhm.
but any
Yeah.
little hints here?
Yeah, and also just to clarify, I was talking about refined sugar when I was responding, not like sugar and fruit. So, in terms of breastfeeding, what's most important to know is that pregnancy and breastfeeding, the mother's body prioritizes the needs of the baby, meaning the nutrients go to the baby first. So if there are not enough nutrients and they go to the baby first, what happens is it could lead to depletion or deficiencies in the mother, even for mothers who aren't breastfeeding but just experience pregnancy. But when you are breastfeeding, your nutrient needs increase even more than when you were pregnant, which is something I don't think a lot of people know. So, actually, during lactation, you need even more of certain nutrients, and it affects the levels of these nutrients in your breast milk. So, for example, studies have shown that these nutrients vary depending on what mothers are eating in their diet. So, B vitamins, iron, vitamins A, D, and K, fatty acids like DHA, choline, iodine. So, what that means is for those nutrients, for all of my breastfeeding clients, I recommend the foods that are high in these nutrients. So, for example, iron, dark leafy greens, B
Right.
vitamins, also dark leafy greens, eggs, choline, eggs, seafood, omega 3s, seafood like salmon is super high in omega 3s. And I could go through this list, but the truth is, the easiest thing to do is just Google foods high in iron, and you'll get an exhaustive list of all of these things.
Right. You have worked with underserved populations in schools, both in Harlem
Mhm.
and Queens. Not all families are equal when it comes to income. What challenges do the low income families face nutrition wise?
I think there are a lot of challenges. I think a few things to note are that one big challenge I see is living in a food desert. So, what a food desert is, it means that you don't have access to nutritious food, meaning the supermarket could be very far away from where you live. And it's surprising to think that even in the biggest cities in the US, the 10 biggest cities all have areas of food deserts. And what happens is people end up relying on corner stores like bodegas instead of being able to trek to the supermarket. And at
Right.
bodegas, they don't have the bigger selection of produce. It's more about convenience, fast foods. Another issue is that there are what's known as food swamps. So this means people have access to supermarkets with foods, fruits and vegetables, but they're also flooded with fast food on every corner, convenience stores that are selling junk food and soda. And it makes it harder to make good choices because you're flooded with lots of less healthy choices that are often less expensive. So there's definitely an environmental issue in terms of the area, but I think also time, energy, money. When you have so much on your plate, eating healthy is not your priority. Paying your rent is your priority. And this makes sense.
Um, in an article, you stated expecting mothers are often surprised to learn that what is eaten during the prenatal period can impact their children
Mhm.
well into the future. Can you go more in depth with that?
Yeah, of course. So there's a lot of emerging evidence that says that nutrition early in life, even when you're pregnant, can impact your child because it's a crucial period of growth and development. The way I like to think about it are there's adverse things, meaning if you don't get it, if you don't get enough of something, an adverse thing could happen, a negative impact. And there's positive things. You get more of something and you get a benefit. So I'll explain what that means. So in terms of adverse effects, vitamin and mineral deficiencies during pregnancy could lead to things such as neural tube defects, improper organ development, low birth weight. For example, in the US, folic acid supplementation is standard of care for all pregnant women because we know that it reduces the risk of having a spinal cord defect. A recent study came out on vitamin D, and it showed that vitamin D deficiency increased a child's risk of developing ADHD. And actually, this was one of the studies that led to government organizations recommending that pregnant women supplement with vitamin D. So all of these things are coming out and people are getting good recommendations based on that. But if you look at positive things, if you add certain nutrients in foods, you could impact neurodevelopment, IQ, memory, metabolic health, reduce the risk of
Really?
diseases. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So, one of the things that does that are omega 3s. So, omega 3s can really impact neurodevelopment. There are a bunch of studies that show this, but what the studies show is that they could help with problem solving skills, motor skills, mental processing. Um, there was actually a recent study that showed high dose omega 3s, of course, with the consent and of your doctor, decrease the risk of asthma during the first 5 years of a child's life by over 50%. So that's pretty cool. Another study showed that,
Right.
sorry, go.
No, I
Another
said
study
right.
showed, oh, okay. It's a little delayed. Another study showed that when taking a multivitamin, which is also standard of care to have a prenatal, at least in the US, that if women start this in the first trimester, their children actually can have a higher IQ and a higher verbal comprehension score than women who are not on a multivitamin.
Really?
Yeah. And choline is a big one. So, choline is a nutrient which is not often in prenatals, which is unfortunate because it really should be in prenatals. You have to search for certain prenatals that have it, and it's very rare to actually find a prenatal with it. But choline supplementation, if you doubled it in this study, what they showed is that if you had choline supplementation here and if you doubled the amount of choline women were getting, their children's attention at 7 years old was significantly better than the group that had lower choline supplementation in pregnancy. So there's a lot of interesting studies and emerging studies that show that there is an impact of prenatal nutrition on childhood outcomes. So it's really interesting and diet becomes so important.
We can probably talk. I mean, I didn't have children, so a lot of what you're telling me, I didn't realize in that first trimester how important that the vitamins were. Um, we could talk quite a bit. I have food cravings, but um, I know that pregnant women, the jokes they had send the husband out to get them pickles.
Mm,
People joke about the food cravings. Chocolate cravings, women have it. They're coming into their cycle because of the magnesium and potassium. Uh, is your body telling you something when you're craving something? I mean, is it?
yeah, it's a great question, and there's a lot of stories that you hear. You need to get me this. I need this. Pickles are a big one, like you said. But when you go back to the science, there isn't good scientific evidence that these cravings are telling you that you're missing that nutrient. Um, for an example, when you're in your third trimester of pregnancy, your nutrient needs are very high. And your iron needs are very high. So if this theory held, you would expect women to be craving iron-rich foods like meat. And they're not. This isn't something you hear, like, go get me a steak. Very rare to hear that. They're often craving carb-heavy foods. There actually was a study that looked at this, and the name of the study was Pickles and Ice Cream, Food Cravings in Pregnancy. And they looked at all sorts of culture, impact, to figure out if it was actually telling us something. And what they concluded was that culture, society, plays a big role in bringing about cravings, but that the field needs more research. So they didn't find that there was a nutrient deficiency linked to these cravings.
Well, we've come sort of to the end of the time. I have some questions I ask everyone at the end of the show. You've got advance notice. First question, what was your best bite of the week?
Yeah, I was thinking hard about this question, and it actually was really simple. I was eating oatmeal, and my son, who's 2, came over. He sat next to me, he sat on my lap, and he cuddled into me, and he started having oatmeal with me. And it was the absolute best bite that I can remember because it was with him. And it just made me realize that food is also about the experience. So my oatmeal was plain, but the experience was amazing.
Fabulous, fabulous. If you wake up tomorrow morning with a new talent, what would the new talent be?
I would love to predict the future. That would be cool.
That could be a blessing and that could be the curse too.
True, true. Be
Sometimes it's
careful what you wish
true.
for. Yeah.
Right, right. Um, Obviously, you prepare food. What was your epic culinary fail?
Yeah, so when I was first learning how to cook, and this was, over a decade ago, I was dating my now husband, and I decided to cook for us salmon with garlic, and it was so disgusting. And to this day, my husband still jokes about our salmon with garlic. Every time I make salmon, he's like, "Oh, I hope it's your specialty, salmon with garlic." But anyway, it was terrible.
Those husbands don't let go of those things. What
Yeah.
didn't I ask you that I probably should have?
Yeah, I think you had great questions. I think the only thing I would want to reiterate to any parents who are watching is that change is always possible. And with the right tools and strategies, ones that are simple and cut through all the confusion, you could really feel calm and confident to handle any mealtime situation. And I think giving parents that empowerment is why I do what I do.
And just to remind folks, and it floated up, you can reach out to Ali at Senta Health, that's Senta health.com, and everything that she offers and services are there. And I know she would love to hear from you. Follow her on Instagram. It's Senta Health, just as I spelled it. Ali, the best of the holiday seasons. I thank you for squeezing us in, and I learned quite a bit today. You can't teach an old dog new tricks.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. It was great to chat with you, and I hope you have an amazing holiday.
Thank you so much. All right, everyone. Um, as I said earlier, next week, not next week, January 5th guest is going to be Jeremy Diamond, author of the just released book, Tastemakers, The Legacy of Jewish Entrepreneurs in the Mid-Atlantic Grocery Industry. The January issue is out on the stands from J Moore. You can sort of see it back here. We'll pull it. There we go. And it's called Aging Gratefully. And there's a story I wrote in there. So grab it, and eventually it'll be up online as well at jmoreliving.com. If you need to reach me, you can reach me at jmoreliving.com. Food at jmoreliving.com is my email. My Instagram is Dara Cooks. All shows are immediately archived in video form up on Jmore Living's Facebook page and jmoreliving.com. Feel free to dig into our archives, video archives of past shows. We truly appreciate it when you share our show with your friends and family. It helps the show grow. As I always end the shows, may your plates always, always remain full. Best of the holidays. I'll see you in the next year.